honest with you, Kysii, if it had been a situation where DeVos, through her foundation, had sent a check down there for $5 or $10 or $15 million to Bethune, I'd have been like, okay, yeah, take that money because you need the money. Use it to educate some of these young black people who need the education,
right,
and let her talk for 15, 20 minutes, and you can sit there on your smartphone while you're in graduation and let it go in one ear and out the other. But at the end of the day, their president allowed her to be honored, and she hadn't done anything for the school. So that's something that was bothering me too, was just the assumption that, well, since she's there and she's comes from this billion-dollar family, that they must be prepared to be benefactors to the university. They weren't. That's the first thing.
Yep.
And we shouldn't be sitting up prostituting ourselves in a way, and I got to use that word prostituting, hoping that she's going to send some money by behaving, because you could sit there and have been well behaved like some people wanted those students to be, and at the end of the day, all you're getting is a lecture from somebody who doesn't understand the historical mission of HBCUs or Bethune-Cookman in particular, and it's just there because of the photo op. And so, I have problems with that form of logic. And I'm not gonna lie, I found it funny. I mean, I at 44, almost 45 years old, I sat there and it reminded me of us at that age. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, yeah, I could see us, turning our backs or walking out of King Chapel,
yep,
had they brought somebody, caustic like that,
yep,
to speak to us too. Fortunately, we didn't have any foolishness like that from 90 to 94, but definitely we would have been the wrong group to try like that, to bring in somebody who definitely does not fit with the values of, African Americans or respect the historical nature of our black colleges and what they have meant to so many of us. So no, I did not feel sorry for her at all. I actually found it to be funny. And I think that, those kids did the right thing in terms of letting their displeasure be known.
Wow, yeah, man, that's good. Hey, man, the way they did their thing, I was like, yes, man. I mean,
I was almost in tears, man. I said, wow, they turned it around. And I'm not gonna lie, man. Once again, it was the sisters. I mean, we've got so many different things we can talk about. And again, I hope I get invited back in the future. But yes, I saw more sisters lead that than I saw even some of the brothers, man. And I said, boy, you gotta love the black girl magic. But once they figure out what it is they're gonna do, they were not gonna be stressed by any of that. They were committed, and again, I tipped my hat to them. I was like, hey, go ahead and get it done, and let this lady know exactly how you feel about her, appearing. And it was just wrong for them to have her there, man. I'm not gonna lie, those kids worked hard to be able to earn their degrees, and that is for them. And to bring in somebody like that just to bring some form of notoriety, well, President Jackson down there, Bethune, got exactly what he wanted. He just didn't get it in the way that he wanted, because there was no other legitimate reason to have her. Again, if she had come there with that check, though, bro, I might have checked my whole mentality about that. I'd be like, hey, that's good money right there. Y'all listen to that foolishness for 15 minutes and let it go in one ear and out the other. You got me?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, but she didn't bring no money, so yeah, she needed to get booed right off that stage.
Yeah. What's the over and under on Trump? 6 months left in office, or you think he's gonna make it out?
Man, let me tell you something, bro. I'm not gonna even lie to you. I want him gone like yesterday, but I really just don't see where the numbers are there right now for them to get rid of him. All right. Now that doesn't mean that those of us who are committed to progressive politics shouldn't keep clamoring for it, because again, what's very interesting here, my brother, is that when I was taking a look at the potential obstruction of justice charge, one of the things that I highlighted in my most recent blog on that at Observation Point is that when you consider that some of the insiders who are leaking information to the press, there was a New York Times article that I referenced in my blog yesterday where the anonymous sources were essentially saying that Trump has shown an enormous ability to avoid any responsibility in terms of reading his daily intelligence briefings and being able to ask cogent questions about the topics that are raised within them. And so essentially what you have here, we have a president at this point in time who doesn't know what is going on really in the world, on the world stage, okay? And so at the end of the day, what happens here is he's the type of person, and we've all seen these types, either in our classes, either, somewhere along our educational track. We've had classmates or people who sat next to you, so to speak, who you could tell were, like Barack Obama said in the interview, were bullshitters. All right. They really haven't prepared. They haven't read the text, but if they get called upon by the teacher, they're rambling on and on and on about a couple of things they've heard other students talking about maybe that day in class, but they're not really tying it all together in a way that would make you think this person knows what they're talking about, right? That's Trump. And so what one of his or some of the sources was saying is that, yeah, his comments to with respect to Russia, letting the envoys who were in his office last week know about information that was culled from Israeli intelligence about ISIS and what have you. And obviously information that, potentially if you're giving it to the Russians, knowing that the Russians are big time supporters of the Iranian regime, knowing that the Iranian regime is one of the last regimes in the Middle East that is committed to wiping Israel off the map. At the end of the day, that fool unwittingly has placed Israel in a more precarious situation at this point in time. And what his advisors are saying is that he didn't do it intentionally. The fool did it because he didn't know any better. He's heard bits and pieces of what it was, made comments to try to make himself look like the man who knows what he's talking about. And again, we've seen these before. And at the end of the day, has unwittingly placed America's ally, Israel, in peril, potentially. So with that in mind, and now separately, in terms of the obstruction charge, that would deal with the going and talking to Comey, in particular about the Mike Flynn situation. And I have listened to this more and more over the last few days. I've tried to switch between CNN to MSNBC to Fox to get the different views on that conversation with Comey. And what I've gleaned at this point from either listening and or reading is that he walks to the line of obstruction with respect to, hey, can you do something about this Mike Flynn investigation, but doesn't completely cross the line to the point that you would need to get him to be found guilty, so to speak, if this was a court case, if you follow where I'm coming from, knowing that he can't be criminally tried right now because he's in office. But at the same time, you have to think of it from the standpoint of if this was a regular defendant getting charged by the grand jury and going to trial for obstruction, have they crossed that line? And arguably asking or talking about that, you could make an argument that that's not the same as using the influence of your office to shut down an investigation, so to speak. Had there been like a direct threat or even an implied threat, which is if you do this, if you keep this investigation going on, we're going to cut the budget for FBI through the Department of Justice or something like that. There was nothing quite like that. In other words, it was just Trump being Trump, shooting off at the mouth, thinking he's the big man on campus, thinking he's saying something to defend a friend, a loyal friend that he considers, Mike Flynn to be, because Flynn was one of the first generals to support his candidacy and was a vigorous supporter of him on the trail. Matter of fact, he was the main lock her up person at almost every campaign rally that he was at. There was Flynn trying to stoke up the Klan rally, so to speak, right? And so at the end of the day, he's thinking that he's helping a friend in need. And so that would be the argument. I'm not saying that's what happened, but that would be the argument. So it's not as cut and dried yet on the obstruction. But if there's one thing I've observed about this man is that give it time. And what I mean by that is his behavior is not going to change, my brother. That's what I'm trying to get at. He is going to be Trump. He is going to be the same ill-informed bully to an extent who isn't going to know what he's talking about, but still thinks because he grew up rich and that he's, this multimillionaire, that he can say what he wants to say to whomever he chooses to say it to. And what's going to wind up happening is eventually, if he keeps along that line, he's going to give just enough rope for the impeachment process, particularly to get started. Now, the reason I was saying that I don't think he's going to be impeached right now is this. We all know that, unfortunately, the Republicans control both chambers, Senate and the House.
Right.
And at the end of the day, whereas there might be enough votes in the House, because the way impeachment works is that the House of Representatives pretty much serves as what we call a grand jury in the regular criminal court. So when you hear them talking about they're bringing articles of impeachment, That's a procedure in the House of Representatives, and we've been through this before. We remember it from 20 years ago, or close to 20 years ago, when Bill Clinton went through it, and then obviously once before in history, Andrew Johnson in the late 1860s, he went through the same process, whereby articles of impeachment, they are akin or analogous to formal charges being brought in a criminal court system, okay? So a lot of times when people see that Andrew Johnson was impeached or Bill Clinton was impeached, that's true. But that just means that Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton were formally charged with different offenses that could have led to their removal. So we also know that in the House, in order for an impeachment to occur, it just has to be by a simple majority. And I'm not really sure, looking at the numbers, that you can get to 218. I don't think that you can get to 218 or greater and what have you with as Congress is currently set. So that's why I'm not optimistic that it would even get out of the House at that point, which is why I think you see House Democrats somewhat walking it back. Like I posted an article on Facebook earlier today from the New York Times about how House Democrats are pretty much urging caution in that regard, because they don't want it to look as if by stoking up the flames with respect to impeachment, you're trying to basically get around the result from last November where Hillary Clinton lost. So I understand that logic behind that. And even though you have some Republicans who are raising the specter of possible impeachment too, I think everybody pretty much in D.C. is pretty much aware that there just simply are not the numbers just yet to get it done, which is segues into the second part, which is assuming that they were able to get past a simple majority to have Donald Trump impeached at this point, which I still think is a steep uphill climb to make. Then it would kick over to the Senate. The Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts would serve as the presiding jurist, and the Senate would then hold what's tantamount to a trial. And in that trial, it would be determined to remove him or not. Again, with Republicans controlling that chamber too, I just don't think we could get to the supermajority that would be necessary. In that body, it would have to be 2/3 of the 100 senators would have to vote to remove him from office. And just no way in hell I think you're going to get the 67 senators, because truth be told, my brother, to be honest with you, there are a lot of Republicans who still like this guy. All right. Yeah. Like they're kind of embarrassed by him. They're kind of like, okay, yeah, he's got some village idiot in him. Yeah, he needs to put the Twitter account, at bay. But at the end of the day, he still is in lockstep with where they are agenda wise in terms of where they want to go with tax reform, where they want to go with immigration reform, where they want to go with building the wall. He is saying and still advocating all of the things they wish for. And so at the end of the day, they're not quite ready to throw him under the bus. Now, if I know anything else, I know this, that can change. If now that they have appointed a special prosecutor, if evidence does later hail forth that there was great collusion and that it went up the chain of command and that Trump was aware of it, that could change at some point in time. But, bro, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not even really convinced at this point that there is significant evidence that would prove that Trump in particular was in cahoots during the campaign with Russian officials. I know that sounds weird and might make a lot of my friends upset, but what I believe is that if that was true with Trump in particular, and I'm focusing on Trump, that probably would have been leaked already by now, if you get where I'm coming from, especially once Comey got the axe last week. I really do believe that if he had the smoking gun on Trump, that we would have heard some type of leak at this point, which is there are some tapes or there are some direct communications where we know for sure that Trump knew that the Russians were doing X, Y, and Z. I do think that they're going to find throughout this investigation that's about to ensue that there were people under Trump who were in cahoots with different people or officials in Russia with respect to this campaign. Mike Flynn being one. I actually believe that that it's going to point directly at him before it's over. And I think it's going to be others that it's going to point at. But I actually think Trump, interestingly enough, is going to be able to avoid any direct implication at this point when it comes to some type of Russian collusion. But that's just me. We'll see. I mean, I hope so. I'd like nothing better than to find out that he was, texting and talking to Putin late in the midnight hour from July through November. I'd love that more than anything, but I just don't think it's there. So again, what does that mean then? What is this the doomsday? No, what happened is Kysii, progressives have to get ready to run in 2018. So while doing everything that could be done in terms of filing lawsuits to block certain aspects of the Republican agenda, and I think that